Network centrality dictates investor success. Nicolas has been publishing a network graph which essentially tries to map everything that happens in the Italian venture capital.
I've got a bunch of data related to all the deals that I talk about every week. I wanted to see what it looks like, to see the relationship between the different actors in the ecosystem.
There are a few papers analyzing the intersection between venture capital and the degree of networking that venture funds have. Whom You Know Matters from 2007, from HOCHBERG, LJUNGQVIST and Yoon. So Nicolas has been publishing a network graph which essentially tries to map everything that happens in the Italian venture capital through a very intuitive and deep map of all the connection between venture capitalists and startups. So Nick, let's start maybe talking about this because I think it's very interesting. It can actually uncover a lot of insights when it comes to the ecosystem. So let's. What is your goal with this? Like, where are you going exactly?
Well, Jack, thank you so much for starting off with this. Actually, to be honest, like during the weekend, I was having an hour of free time. I had completed the newsletter. I was like, what should I do now? Let's try some vibe coding. And now, what
Love
should I
it.
do? Okay, let's play around with a network graph. Like, so first things first. In less than 1 hour, it was up and running.
Unbelievable.
Support from the research. Yes. And I'm an old school developer back in the days, and probably it would have taken me like half a day to set up this from scratch because I never used the library, so I knew nothing about visualizing network maps. So incredible. Secondly, I've got a bunch of data related to all the deals that I talk about every week because I save them in a database, and I use the database for the weekly updates about fundraising in Italy. But I got a bunch of information like who invested where, in whom, and when. And then I wanted to see what it looks like, to see the relationship between the different actors in the ecosystem. And this first iteration is interesting. You see the centrality of some players, like CDP, of course, but there are other, who invested with whom. And it's a nice starting point to understand the relationships in the ecosystem.
I encourage people to really check out the sort of the V1, the first sort of version of this. I'm sure it can only get better and better, but it's very interesting. First of all, I think for people that try to get a hold of what's happening in Italy, maybe from abroad, that can be a great tool to actually get a good feel on where are the clustering like investor, where they are based, and where they're investing. So I think, as you mentioned, there is a couple of clusters that I've seen. So CDP being the biggest, of course, big central node. Then, surprisingly, a lot of business angels I saw, but also just to mention a few. Well, actually, you mentioned one, Lifty. Lifty also has a high degree of connectivity, so that's pretty interesting. Any comments on the pattern as you were building it? Any hidden patterns that maybe are less obvious?
No, I have to say that this type of visualization still doesn't provide a full or a more complete information, not full. For example, you might have key questions around who are the international investors, who are the national investors. So the color of the blue nodes might be different, and see the relationships there, and expect these relationships to evolve over time. And for example, introducing the concept of time, for example, would be interesting, and to filter to see the
Good
first
idea.
and second connections for a specific investor. That would be interesting as well.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of things to do. As you said, I'm not surprised around the centrality of CDP and of the measure funds, Pre60, Primo, the Lifty, as you said. We are still stage investors. We invest volume. We tend to talk a lot about the investments, and so the news is out. So you see the centrality. What still doesn't emerge clearly is the relationship among the nodes, and I would like to make that more visible. And the other thing that's interesting is the constellation of isolated points floating around the connected center.
That's
And
true.
that's interesting. That's
That was
interesting.
interesting. Yeah.
Yes.
So for the listener, basically around the graph. So well, I would say most of the investment are kind of connected among the classic operators, but there is a very interesting sort of perimeter, like a circle circling the main nodes, which are kind of independent and detached, but pretty active actually. So substantial number is as you say, is a constellation around the big planets. It's like smaller operators. Maybe they've done like 1 to 2 to 3 investments, but it still is a solid belt that is circling the main nodes. Very interesting.
Yeah, super interesting. I will try to vibe code more components into the graph, into the map, and see how it evolves. So I will keep you posted.
I'm also curious on how you're gonna. I mean, how far you can get with maybe the like searching function. Like if a founder wanna search, maybe vertical, maybe round size. Maybe some people play with the size of the bubble for rounds. That's, I think, can be something cool. So there is a lot to do, and I'm excited. I know. Of course, Nick. Of course. So I'm excited, and I think it can be very, very valuable tool. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So to add on top of that, of course, I'm a big fan of network graphs, and there are a few papers actually which are very, very interesting, analyzing the intersection between venture capital and the degree of networking that venture funds have. One to mention, I think, is very interesting. Is basically the name of the paper is "Whom You Know Matters" from 2007, from HOCHBERG, LJUNGQVIST, and Yoon. Basically from Kellogg's University and Kellogg's Business School. So essentially, it's very interesting because the big principle here is that network centrality dictates investor success. So very bold statement, Nick. Yes, indeed. And very interesting methodology. So these guys took basically data from VC and portfolio companies, basically mostly from the 80s and the 90s. So it kind of needs an update there, but I think the insight is pretty interesting. And they were trying to measure the connectedness of venture according to different parameters, which I think it's pretty smart. So it's not just who you know, and that's pretty much not enough. So basically they work on 5 different parameters, which is the degree centrality. So basically, how many links you have, how many people you have co-invested with. The other element is the in degree, which is the frequency. Basically, on how many times basically you are invited to join other rounds. So it's not just the connection, but also how many times you're invited to co-invest with other firms. And then the opposite is the out degree, which is how many times a VC fund invites other VCs to actually connect and co-invest with other firms. And the last two are eigenvector centrality, which is very interesting, which very, big name, simple concept. So essentially it's not a matter of how many people is a matter of how many well-connected people So even if you know less people, but if those people are well-connected, then you have a higher degree of eigenvector centrality. So big element here, I think, in the VC talk around professionals, eigenvector centrality really comes a long way. I think it probably has like a bigger role than other. And then finally, the degree of betweenness, which essentially how much you are a connector among other investor and rounds. Well, you don't even participate. So how good you are, how good in introduction you are, which it was surprising to me that just by thinking about network theory and overlapping it to good VC practice, it's a great match, because if you run a firm with this in mind, I think it's definitely like a very good way to improve your operations. I mean, what's your take on this, Nick?
No, super, super interesting. Even though Some of this is an emerging type of information that nowadays, with the problem of the zombie unicorns, is being flipped on its head. So you see conversation around these unicorns were born because the usual investor knew the usual investor who invested at too high valuation, despite what's the fundamental of the startup, because they know each other and they kind of co-inflate. So this is the conversation. I'm not saying that it's true. So this type of relationship can become, kind of a counterpoint to how things evolve in time between investors, and I don't know, but that's one of the conversations that's going on. But super, super interesting. I mean,
So a
I need
couple
to
more
study
points. Yeah, now we will share it in the notes of this episode. I think it's valuable, and a couple of more notes, and then we pass it. We talk about the news of last week. Well, just really briefly, this kind of investment success related to networking is measured in terms of two things, which is exit, so IPOs or M&As, and which is a great proxy metrics. We don't have IRR; is very difficult. So let's get practical. So. The authors really did a good job doing that. I think it's very, very smart. And secondly, I think, which is a very interesting point, is the fact that there is also like a part which explains how portfolio companies of better networked VCs are significantly more likely to survive in subsequent financing. So it's not just the degree of successfulness of the VC fund itself, but also that kind of networking part really benefits the portfolio companies. So overall, it's really definitely like a very powerful tool to actually activate as a VC fund. Yeah.
No, not only. So this is super interesting if you are a founder raising capital. I mean, intuitively, the best ones have ask these questions: how good you are, how connected you are, what's your value to the portfolio company. But at the end of the day, you see there the hard data saying that VCs that have connection, that are involved in the ecosystem, provide better value to the portfolio companies.
Indeed.
Super interesting.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. Need some updates. It's 2007, but I think is definitely relevant and definitely overlaps with some of the best practice that we kind of know intuitively, and they're there in the air. But yeah, it's hard data now. I mean, it's been hard data. It's backed. It's there. So it's super, super useful.
That data should be much more accessible today. So, Jack, do you want to think on the updates?
Yes, let's write. Let's go. Let's you finish your graph and then we use that.
That's the starting point, yes.
Awesome. No,
that's the hard part, but
yeah, no, that's why I'm saying. I think the work you're doing with this, I think has a bigger implication, even if it's vibe coding, but still the implication are very, very profound and big. So definitely a very, very cool tool.
45 minutes of vibe coding and see what it takes you. Publishing a paper.
I love it.
Nice.
All right, moving on with the biggest round of last week. So let's talk about Resilco, waste management startup, raising 5 million in a Series A round from 360 Capital, CDP Venture Capital, and Tech for Planet. So essentially, what Resilco is doing is doing something very interesting in terms of sustainable economy. So they're working on upcycling anything which is like ashes, industrial ashes, to make them pretty much non-hazardous and useful in terms of building structure. So what they do is they have a technology to accelerate essentially a natural carbonation process, where basically CO2 carbonates are essentially made harmless, and then they can be used in construction in general. So very interesting trend. There are a few sustainability companies working in this direction, kind of making sort of a circular cycle, which is very, very interesting. I can see how difficult it might be actually to sort of transition traditional people building infrastructure to use and basically use at a mass scale these kind of materials. But definitely the technology is very, very interesting, and for sure with a lot of impact. So very, very cool.
Interesting, super interesting.
All right, moving forward, Brum, edtech startup raising 3.5 million in an early stage round from Italian Founders Fund. So a couple of things here, pretty interesting. So Brum is a company that essentially is disrupting a very old business, which is Italian driver license, which has been historically extremely bureaucratic and clunky. So definitely a very good play in a very good market. So very interesting for millennial and Gen Z. So awesome. An interesting point is that this company was born inside the One Day Group, which is basically a group of entrepreneurs that have been launching pretty successful companies. So I think it's very interesting, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, super interesting. This is kind of that thesis that every now and then emerges, the boring problems, like taking a driving license, but completely innovating the supply chain to get to the driving license. Super interesting.
Yeah, and the cool thing is the experience also. I was reading a little bit on how they're doing it. Well, flexible packaging, flexible classes, anything you would imagine from an education platform. On top of that, which is cool, is that you can book your driving practice in different spots in Milan, around Milan. So wherever you are, you can just like book in an Uber, but you have an hour free, and then you just go and do your thing. But the other thing is that also driving instructor have a platform for them. So there is a more clear relationship between client and instructor, which I think is very, very powerful.
Super interesting.
Awesome. Yeah. Let's move on with talking about Bending Spoon acquiring Komoot. Nick, tell me your impressions on this. Very interesting.
I mean, Komoot, it's very Bending Spoon. Consumer company. I don't know whether to call Komoot a startup with a huge community. I think I read 45 million users,
Yes.
so something.
Yes.
A huge number. With big possibility to monetize and evolve the model. So that's really Bending Spoon. I would have never put my money on something like that. I didn't even know Komoot, so I say, boo, never heard of them. But very, very Bending Spoon.
No, exactly. I agree. Big user base, maybe a little bit underperforming. They can easily come in and support the team and really make it explode. And that's definitely in line also with other deals. And so I'm always curious if at some point they're gonna kind of blend and use some form of a mega platform, maybe on some specific activities and use cases, or they're gonna keep everything separate in a portfolio kind of structure. I don't know. I'm curious to see what it's gonna take them. But I agree with you. It's very, very Bending Spoon, very, very quick, and looking forward to see how exactly they're gonna build it to the next level. Very interesting. All right, let's just a quick AI corner. So for the first time, I think on the planet, Italy published the first fully AI-generated newspaper, and that's Il Foglio, which I was very surprised it was Il Foglio doing that, to be honest. Typically is on a conservative side, I would say, without, I don't want to argue that, but, I wouldn't expect it would be Il Foglio, but they issued essentially, I think a few days ago, 4 papers, basically, which are conjoined with the regular newspaper. And those 4 pages are completely written through AI, where journalists just use basically prompts to essentially build all the articles. So there you go. I don't know.
So
I mean,
would have never thought that such a thing would come out of Italy, for example.
I agree. I mean,
For
Nick,
several reasons, but
from banning GPT at the start to actually getting the first publication fully AI, unbelievable. What's going on? I don't know.
That's super. I'm really happy to see that this experiment here, but I mean, it's super. So when do we fully get into AI podcast?
We should have a guest. We should have an AI guest with which we can kind of debate. There you go. That's another vibe coding project for you for next weekend.
Wow. Let me add the
Think about
GPT
it.
with this pitch.
Awesome.
Wow.
All right.
For the punchlines.
Exactly. With this high note, thank you, Nick, for joining. This brings us to the end, and I'll see you next week.